Unexpected visitor. The sharp knock echoed through the small wooden cabin, a stark contrast against the howling wind outside. Inside, Seria's eyes snapped toward the door. No one ever came this deep into the frozen wilderness. She moved swiftly, silently, her body tense with suspicion as she reached the door. Whoever was on the other side was either lost, desperate, or a threat. Seria preferred to assume the latter. Another knock, this one weaker. A dying man, then. She exhaled sharply, slipping the blade into the sheath at her thigh before unlocking the door. The bitter wind slammed into her as she pulled it open, and her gaze landed on the figure standing at her threshold. A man. Human. Tall, broad-shouldered, his flight suit torn and dusted with snow. His short dark hair was matted with ice, and his face was pale from the cold. He swayed slightly, barely holding himself upright. His gaze lifted to hers, sharp even through exhaustion. "Help me," he rasped. Seria didn't move. A human here? It had been years since she had seen one up close. Her people hated them. She had every reason to send him back into the storm, to let the cold finish him off. And yet. She stepped back. "Get inside," she ordered. The human didn't hesitate. He staggered forward past the threshold and collapsed onto the wooden floor. Seria shut the door with a firm click, sealing out the storm. She turned, arms crossed, watching as he shivered violently, his breaths ragged. He reeked of smoke. His ship must have crashed. That explained why he was here, but it didn't explain why she was letting him stay. Seria exhaled sharply. "Take off that frozen suit before you die in it," she commanded. The human's blue eyes flickered toward her, assessing, wary. "You always this welcoming," he muttered through chattering teeth. Seria arched a dark brow. "Would you rather I throw you back outside?" The man let out a hoarse chuckle. Then, with slow, stiff movements, unzipped the damaged flight suit and peeled it off. Seria forced her gaze away. She grabbed a fur-lined blanket from the corner and tossed it at him. "Sit by the fire. You'll warm up faster." The human wrapped the blanket around his shoulders, shifting closer to the crackling flames. "Name's Carl," he said, his voice steadier now. Seria didn't respond. Carl exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "Not big on introductions, huh?" "I don't see the point," she said flatly. "What do I call you then?" "Ice Queen." Seria's eyes flashed. "Seria," she said sharply. Carl's smirk deepened. "Nice to meet you, Seria." She rolled her eyes and turned away, grabbing a metal cup and filling it with steaming water from the pot over the fire. "Drink," she ordered, handing it to him. Carl took it, their fingers brushing briefly. His skin was warm now, the cold no longer leaching his strength. Seria watched him from the corner of her eye. She knew better than to trust a human, but it was too late for that now. She had let him in. Uneasy alliance. Carl sat close to the fire, letting the heat soak into his frozen skin. The blanket draped over his shoulders did little to stop the occasional shiver that racked his body, but at least he wasn't dying anymore. Seria sat across from him, sharpening a curved blade with slow, deliberate movements. The soft scrape of metal against stone filled the cabin, an unspoken warning that she wasn't lowering her guard. She didn't trust him. That much was obvious. Carl, rolling his sore shoulder, broke the silence. "So, this the part where you interrogate me?" Seria didn't look up. "If I wanted answers, I wouldn't need to ask." Carl raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to scare me?" Her lips curled slightly. "It should." He stretched his legs out, adjusting the blanket. "I crashed here by accident, if that's what you're wondering. Wasn't exactly aiming to drop into the middle of an ice storm." Seria glanced at him. "And your ship?" Carl exhaled. "Burned up on impact. Nothing left but scrap." Seria nodded once, as if confirming something she already knew. And your people? Carl's jaw tightened slightly. Not coming. She tilted her head, watching him closely. You sound sure about that. He shrugged, masking any hint of emotion. They don't waste resources on lost causes. Seria studied him for a moment longer before returning to her blade. So you're stranded. Looks that way. Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken implication. Finally, Seria sheathed her weapon and stood, moving toward a metal storage chest against the far wall. She pulled it open, rummaging through supplies before tossing a bundle of dark fabric onto the table. Put that on, she ordered. Your suit's useless, and I don't need you freezing to death under my roof. Carl eyed the clothes, a thick fur-lined shirt and heavy pants made from some kind of reinforced material. He let out a low chuckle. Didn't take you for the generous type. Seria shot him a warning look. It's not generosity. It's survival. If you die here, you become my problem. Sounds like you're already considering me a problem, he said. Seria exhaled sharply. Just get dressed, human. Carl took his time standing, stretching out the stiffness in his limbs before pulling the borrowed clothes on. They fit surprisingly well, though the fabric held the faint scent of leather and something undeniably her. Seria turned away, giving him space, but he caught the way her shoulders remained tense, always poised for action. She wasn't just cautious, she was expecting him to be a threat. When he was finished, he ran a hand through his short hair and exhaled. All right. Now what? Seria finally faced him, arms crossed. Now we set the rules. Carl raised an eyebrow. Rules? This is my cabin, she said evenly. I built it. I maintain it. I protect it. That means you do what I say, when I say it. Carl chuckled. Not much of a democracy. She arched a brow. Do you see a Senate here? Fair point. She stepped closer, her presence commanding despite her relatively small frame. If you expect to stay, you pull your weight. That means working, hunting, keeping this place livable. You sure you want me that close to all your weapons? Seria didn't blink. If you become a problem, I'll deal with it. The confidence in her voice was unwavering. He tilted his head. Anything else, boss? Seria's eyes darkened slightly at the mocking title, but she didn't take the bait. Instead, she walked to the window, staring out at the swirling snowstorm beyond. The temperature drops below freezing at night, she said, voice calm but firm. Even with the fire, it won't be enough. Carl leaned against the table. What are you saying? Seria turned back to him, expression unreadable. We share body heat. Silence. Carl blinked. Come again. Seria's stance remained unwavering, as if discussing something as simple as rations. We sleep in the same bed. The cold is lethal. I'm not letting you die under my roof. Carl exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. That's pragmatic. It's survival. Cold nights, warm hearts. Carl studied her carefully, searching for any sign that this was some kind of game, but Seria wasn't the type to joke. No, she was dead serious. She was right, still, he couldn't resist needling her just a little. You always this hospitable to strangers? Seria's lips pressed into a thin line. You're the first human I haven't shot on sight. Carl chuckled. I feel special. Seria ignored him, moving toward the single bed against the far wall. She pulled back the heavy furs, then glanced at him expectantly. Well? Carl shook his head, amused. You really know how to set a mood, don't you? Seria's patience was wearing thin. Get in or sleep on the floor and die. Your choice. Carl smirked, stepping forward. When you put it like that. He slid onto the bed, the mattress firm but warm from the fire's residual heat. Seria climbed in next to him, her movements precise, controlled. She kept a respectable distance, but Carl wasn't an idiot, he could feel the tension between them. He turned his head slightly, watching her stare at the ceiling, arms crossed as if trying to will herself not to acknowledge his presence. Carl grinned. "You look thrilled." Seria exhaled slowly. "Shut up and sleep, human." Carl chuckled but obeyed, letting his body relax into the warmth of the bed. Hours later, he woke to find their positions had shifted dramatically. Her back was against his chest, her form wrapped in the shared furs, their legs tangled beneath the blankets. She was warm, her body heat radiating into him, her breathing slow and steady in sleep. Carl remained still, torn between the primal satisfaction of the moment and the very real knowledge that if she woke up and realized how close they were, she might drive a knife into his ribs on instinct. Carefully, he shifted an inch away, but even that small movement made her stir. In an instant, Seria was awake. He barely had time to react before she twisted, her hand shooting to the blade beneath her pillow. Carl raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy, boss," he said, voice rough from sleep. "Not trying to stab you in your sleep, if that's what you're wondering." Seria's green eyes flickered over him, sharp with assessment. It took her a second to fully register their proximity, to realize she had slept against him, that they were still close enough to share breath. Her jaw tightened, and she abruptly pushed away, sitting up and swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Carl smirked. "Not a morning cuddler." Seria shot him a glare over her shoulder. "If you want to keep your limbs, you'll drop the subject." Carl chuckled, stretching out on the bed as she stood and crossed the cabin. She moved like a soldier, every action deliberate, precise. He sat up, running a hand through his short hair. "So what's the plan, boss? You putting me to work today?" Seria was already at the storage chest, pulling out a thick cloak lined with fur. "If you're going to stay here, you contribute. You don't sit around making noise." Carl raised a brow. "Making noise?" Seria pulled on her boots and stood, arms crossed. "You talk too much." Carl grinned. "And yet you keep answering me. Almost like you enjoy it." Seria clearly resisted the urge to throw something at his head. Carl swung his legs off the bed and stood. "All right, fine. Give me a job. Let me prove I'm useful." Seria tossed him a thick pair of gloves. "We need firewood. You chop it." Carl caught the gloves with one hand, amused. "Manual labor? Thought you'd give me something more exciting." Seria's lips curled in a faint smirk. "You wouldn't survive anything more exciting." Carl chuckled, stepping toward her, deliberately entering her space just to see if she'd flinch. She didn't. She just watched him with those penetrating green eyes. "Don't underestimate me," he said, voice dropping lower. "I might surprise you." Seria's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes, curiosity, perhaps. Or challenge. "We'll see," she said simply. The storm within. Days passed, falling into an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, they rose with the weak winter sun. Seria would hunt, moving through the snow with practiced stealth. Carl managed the cabin, chopping wood, repairing the small damages from the harsh elements, maintaining the fire that kept them alive. At night, they shared the bed without discussion, though Carl noticed Seria no longer slept with her blade beneath her pillow. It was on the 7th day that everything changed. The storm had grown worse, trapping them inside. The wind howled like a wounded beast, rattling the wooden walls of the cabin. Seria paced the small space, restless as a caged animal. "Sit down," Carl said, watching her from his spot by the fire. "You're making me dizzy." Seria shot him a look but continued pacing. "Something's wrong." Carl raised an eyebrow. "Besides the apocalyptic storm outside?" She shook her head, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. It's too quiet. The wind is literally screaming. Not that kind of quiet. Seria moved to the window, peering out into the swirling white. The animals. They've gone silent. Carl stood, joining her at the window. What does that mean? Seria's expression was grim. It means we're not alone out here anymore. As if on cue, a distant sound cut through the howling wind, the low mechanical hum of engines. Carl tensed. That's a Federation scout ship. Seria's eyes narrowed. Your people. Not my people, Carl said, his voice hardening. Not anymore. You said they wouldn't come for you. They didn't come for me. He turned to her, his expression deadly serious. They came for you. For your people. Seria's hand went to her blade. How did they find us? Carl ran a hand through his hair. My crash. They must have picked up the signal. You led them here. It wasn't a question. Not intentionally. Carl met her gaze evenly. But yes. The tension between them crackled like the fire in the hearth. Seria's fingers tightened around her blade, and for a moment, Carl thought she might use it on him. But instead, she moved swiftly to the storage chest, pulling out weapons and supplies. We need to move, she said, her voice crisp with urgency. Now. Carl caught her arm. Seria, wait. That storm will kill us. The Federation will do worse, she countered. Carl's grip tightened slightly. Let me help. Seria looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. Why would you help me against your own kind? Because they're not my kind anymore, Carl said quietly. They left me to die, remember? Seria's expression softened almost imperceptibly. What's your plan? Carl released her arm, stepping back. We can't outrun them in this storm. But we can make them think we did. Seria raised an eyebrow. How? Carl grinned, a reckless, daring expression that should have warned Seria exactly what kind of man she'd been harboring all this time. We're going to blow up your cabin. Breaking ice. You want to do what? Seria stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Create a diversion, Carl explained, already gathering supplies. Make them think we died in the explosion. Meanwhile, we slip out through that hidden tunnel you pretend I don't know about. Seria's eyes narrowed. How did you? I noticed things, Carl said simply. It's how I survived this long. For a moment, Seria seemed torn between anger and admiration. Then her practical nature took over. It could work, she admitted. But we'd need to time it perfectly. Carl nodded. I'll rig the explosion. You gather what we need to survive the trek to your people's settlement. They moved quickly, efficiently, like partners who had worked together for years instead of days. Carl used the cooking gas and some chemical compounds he found among Seria's supplies to create a crude but effective explosive device. Meanwhile, Seria packed only the essentials, weapons, medical supplies, enough food for 3 days. As they worked, the mechanical hum grew louder. The Federation scouts were getting closer. Time to go, Carl said, setting the timer on his makeshift bomb. We have 5 minutes. Seria nodded, lifting the hidden trapdoor beneath the rug. A narrow tunnel stretched before them, barely wide enough for Carl's broad shoulders. Ladies first, he gestured with mock gallantry. Seria rolled her eyes but slipped into the tunnel without hesitation. Carl followed, pulling the trapdoor shut behind them. They crawled through the darkness, the cold earth pressing in around them. Above, they could hear the muffled sounds of the Federation scouts breaching the cabin. Then came the explosion, a deep, reverberating boom that shook the very ground they crawled through. Dirt rained down on them as they pushed forward, guided only by Seria's knowledge of the path and the faint glow of emergency lights she had installed along the way. After what felt like hours, they emerged from the tunnel into the howling storm. The snow was blinding, the wind a physical force that threatened to knock them off their feet. Seria grabbed Carl's hand, leading him forward. They moved as one through the white wasteland, their bodies close, sharing what little warmth they could generate. "This way," Seria shouted over the wind, pulling him toward a rock formation barely visible through the snow. They stumbled into a small cave, collapsing against the stone wall as the storm raged outside. For a moment, they simply breathed, their chests heaving from exertion. Then Seria turned to Carl, her green eyes intense in the dim light. "You saved my life." Carl shrugged, but there was no hiding the significance of the moment. "You saved mine first. Seemed only fair." Siria's lips curved into a rare smile. "Is that what this is about? Fairness?" "No," Carl admitted, holding her gaze. "It's not about fairness." The tension between them shifted, transformed into something electric, inevitable. Seria moved first, closing the distance between them, her hand coming to rest against his chest. "My people will not welcome you," she said softly. Carl covered her hand with his own. "I don't need their welcome. Just yours." Siria's eyes searched his, looking for deception, for manipulation, all the things humans had proven themselves capable of in the past. But all she found was truth, bare and unguarded. "You have it," she said simply. Carl leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. "Then that's enough." Outside, the storm began to subside, the howling wind softening to a gentle whisper. The worst had passed, both outside and within. As they prepared to continue their journey to Seria's settlement, Carl looked back at the direction they had come from, where the remains of Seria's cabin smoldered beneath the snow. "I'm sorry about your home," he said. Seria followed his gaze, then looked at him, something new and warm in her expression. "Home isn't always a place," she said quietly. Carl smiled, understanding the weight of her words, the promise they contained. Together, they stepped back into the snow, ready to face whatever came next. They would survive. They always did. The end.